Lexi Hull doing it all on that defensive possession. Clark. Oh! From another stratosphere!
What happens when a franchise tries to bury its brightest star, and she responds by dismantling an undefeated team on national television? What happens when the medical excuse you fabricated on Wednesday completely collapses under the weight of Friday night's stat sheet? What happens when every single number, every single minute played, every single assist delivered becomes an irrefutable piece of evidence against the very organization that tried to silence a generational talent? I will tell you exactly what happens. The truth detonates. And right now, the Indiana Fever front office is standing in the middle of the blast radius with absolutely nowhere to hide. The sports media establishment woke up Saturday morning to a box score that they desperately wished did not exist. The analysts who spent the entire week crafting elaborate defenses for head coach Stephanie White suddenly had nothing to say. The beat reporters who dutifully parroted fabricated injury reports without asking a single challenging question were scrolling through their own articles in quiet humiliation. And the league executives who chose to look the other way while thousands of paying fans were systematically defrauded found themselves staring at statistical evidence that makes their inaction look like institutional complicity. Because on Friday night, Caitlyn Clark did not just play basketball. She detonated every single lie the Indiana Fever organization told earlier that week. She did it with 22 points, 9 assists, elite shooting efficiency, and 32 minutes of relentless, physically demanding, high-intensity basketball against the previously unbeaten Golden State Valkyries. And in doing so, she handed us the most damning, most incriminating, and most vindicating box score of the entire 2026.
I don't care what nobody says. Now, I do got to say all of this is alleged, but for her to play 32 minutes, solid 32, she had 9 assists. She could still possibly pick up this 10th assist with 41 seconds left and get another double-double. She was 7 of 15 for the field so far. She was 4 of 5 on free throw.
WNBA season. Welcome back. This is Simply Explained, and today we are conducting a full forensic autopsy on the game that mathematically proved what millions of fans already knew in their bones. The Wednesday night benching was never about a back injury. It was never about medical caution. It was about control, ego, and organizational dysfunction so deep that it threatens to consume an entire franchise from the inside out. Let us reconstruct the timeline with surgical precision, because the sequence of events is so damning that it practically prosecutes itself. On Wednesday evening, approximately 1 hour before tip-off against the weakest expansion roster in the league, the Indiana Fever suddenly scratched Caitlyn Clark from the active lineup. General Manager Amber Cox and head coach Stephanie White presented a unified message to the public. Clark had reportedly woken up that morning with severe back stiffness. The medical staff had examined her and determined that she could not safely participate. White stood at the post-game podium and delivered the explanation with complete confidence, suggesting that the organization was simply being cautious and prioritizing the long-term health of their franchise cornerstone. The public was told to accept this at face value. Thousands of fans who had purchased tickets specifically to watch Caitlyn Clark play were left sitting in their seats watching a diminished roster stumble through a lifeless performance. Many of those fans had traveled from out of state. Many had spent hundreds of dollars on tickets, hotel rooms, parking, and merchandise. They were given no advance warning, no opportunity for a refund, and no meaningful explanation beyond a vague reference to back stiffness that conveniently materialized on the morning of the least consequential game on the schedule. Now fast forward exactly 48 hours. The bright lights of a nationally televised broadcast illuminate the court. The opponent is no longer a struggling expansion team. It is the Golden State Valkyries, the only undefeated squad remaining in the entire league, a team built with elite defensive personnel and coached to suffocate opposing ball handlers. This is the biggest game of the young season, and the cameras are rolling. And there she is.
Dart passes, bro. So, no, it was Janelle Sloan and Caitlyn Clark. Referees had to step in. Look at Caitlyn, guys. Showing how tough she is. Hitting logo threes as well. Getting inside. Just Caitlyn is so damn good, bro. I think, man, it's just crazy how...
Caitlyn Clark, fully dressed, fully healthy, fully operational. She did not ease into the game with cautious, limited minutes. She did not come off the bench for a brief test run. She started the game, played 32 minutes, which was more than any other player on the entire Indiana roster, and proceeded to systematically dismantle one of the best defensive units in professional basketball. 22 points, 9 assists, falling just one short of a double-double, 7 of 15 from the field for 46% shooting efficiency, 4 of 9 from beyond the three-point arc, 4 of 5 from the free throw line. A +7 rating in her minutes on the court. She pushed the ball in transition, absorbed physical contact in the lane, launched deep three-pointers from well beyond the arc, and orchestrated a flowing offensive system that made every single teammate around her measurably better. Now I need you to sit with the biological reality of what you just read. The human spine is one of the most complex and sensitive structural systems in the entire body. Legitimate back stiffness severe enough to prevent a professional athlete from even suiting up for a basketball game does not resolve itself in 48 hours to the point where that same athlete can play 32 minutes of full contact, high-velocity, 94-foot basketball. It does not happen.
I think I call a timeout. I don't know what happened. I got to see what happened, guys. So I'm streaming the game right here on my phone. Why would the Fever call a timeout? Let me see. Oh, probably so they can run a clock. Crazy Caitlyn Clark stat just came up. Let me see here.
It cannot happen. The recovery protocols for genuine spinal issues involve days of rest, gradual reintroduction of movement, careful monitoring of load and intensity, and a progressive return to play timeline that would never culminate in a player logging the heaviest minute total on her entire team just 2 days later. The box score from Friday night is not just a collection of impressive statistics. It is a medical impossibility document. It is proof, written in the official language of professional basketball analytics, that the Wednesday night injury report was a complete fabrication. Caitlyn Clark was healthy on Wednesday. She was healthy when she was scratched, and whoever made the decision to remove her from that game did so for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with her back. When the conversation shifts to what actually happened on the basketball court Friday night, the evidence becomes even more devastating for those who have tried to diminish Caitlyn Clark's impact on this franchise. Look at what happened to Aaliyah Boston the moment Clark returned to the lineup. Boston did not just play well. She played the single best game of her entire 2026 campaign. In 29 minutes of action, she scored 20 points on 8 of 15 shooting, grabbed an absolutely monstrous 16 rebounds including 4 on the offensive glass, and posted a staggering +15 rating. 16 rebounds. That is a performance that belongs in any conversation about the best individual stat lines of the entire WNBA season to this point. This is not a coincidence. This is the Caitlyn Clark effect operating at full capacity. When Clark is on the floor running the offense, reading the defense, and delivering the basketball to the exact right spot at the exact right moment, the entire ecosystem of the Indiana Fever transforms. The high-low passes into the paint gave Boston clean looks at the basket instead of forcing her to manufacture offense out of nothing. The transition outlets pushed the pace and allowed Boston to run the floor and receive the ball in advantageous positions before defenses could set up. The pick-and-roll reads created driving lanes and pocket passes that turned Boston from a role player grinding for scraps into a dominant force operating with precision-guided service. This is the partnership that makes Indiana a legitimate threat to every team in the league. Clark and Boston operating in tandem is the most dangerous two-player combination the Fever have had in years. And every single game where Clark is removed from the lineup,
Caitlyn is just so much better, bro. Bro, the announcer just said, Caitlyn, listen. They just said Caitlyn Clark is an instant MVP candidate.
either through fabricated injuries or through coaching decisions designed to diminish her role, that partnership evaporates and the entire team collapses into mediocrity. We also must recognize the ice-cold execution of Kelsey Mitchell, who played 31 minutes and delivered one of the most clutch free throw shooting performances you will ever see. Mitchell went 11 for 11 from the charity stripe. Perfect. 100%. In a game decided by 8 points against an undefeated opponent, That kind of reliability from the free throw line is not a footnote. It is a foundational pillar of the victory. When the pressure mounted and the Valkyries tightened the screws in the fourth quarter, Mitchell stepped to the line repeatedly and converted every single opportunity without hesitation. The players delivered. The talent on this roster executed a masterpiece. But the individual sitting on the sideline with a clipboard spent the entire evening actively working against her own team's best interests. Just 24 hours before Friday night's game, the Indiana Fever front office finally responded to weeks of overwhelming public pressure and analytical criticism. They waived Cheyenne Walker-Kimbrough and signed Grace Van Slooten, a 6'3" athletic forward whose physical profile directly addresses the most glaring roster deficiency on the entire team. Van Slooten provides length, transition speed, rebounding motor, and defensive versatility. She is the exact type of player that every statistical model, every film study, and every honest basketball evaluation has identified as the missing piece in Indiana's rotation. This was a significant roster move. The front office, whether willingly or under duress from the fan base and the analytical community, brought in the right player at the right time. Common sense had prevailed. The tool to maximize this roster alongside Caitlyn Clark had finally arrived. So what did Stephanie White do with this critical new acquisition in the biggest game of the season? She buried her. Completely, deliberately, and spitefully buried her. Grace Van Slooten played exactly 1 minute and 44 seconds on Friday night. 1 minute and 44 seconds against an undefeated opponent in a game that was competitive throughout. That is not a coaching decision based on basketball merit. That is not a reasonable assessment of a new player's readiness. That is a statement. That is a head coach so thoroughly consumed by ego and resentment toward outside criticism that she would rather risk losing a basketball game than validate the people who demanded the roster move in the first place. White inserted Van Slooten for a microscopic cameo, just long enough to technically check the box that she played the new acquisition, and then immediately glued her back to the bench for the remainder of the contest. It was a passive-aggressive act of coaching sabotage disguised as game management. She would rather run undersized lineups, exhaust her guards with excessive minutes, and surrender rebounding advantages than acknowledge that the front office, pressured by the fans, made the right call. And the hypocrisy does not end there. Scroll to the very bottom of Friday night's official box score and find one particular entry. Damiris Dantas did not play. Coach's decision. Remember what happened last week. Remember Stephanie White standing at the podium, looking directly into cameras, and explicitly announcing that she intended to run a significant portion of the Fever's half-court offense through Damiris Dantas in the high post. Remember how that declaration was widely interpreted as a direct shot at Caitlyn Clark, a public statement designed to diminish Clark's on-ball authority and redistribute offensive responsibility to a player who has never demonstrated the playmaking capacity to justify that role. That press conference was presented as a legitimate strategic philosophy. White spoke about it with conviction, framing it as a basketball decision rooted in tactical wisdom. It was the quote that ignited an already furious fan base into open revolt. And now, against the best team on the schedule, against the opponent where tactical conviction would matter most, the player who was supposedly going to anchor the entire offensive identity did not step foot on the court. Not for a single second. Complete, total, healthy DNP, coach's decision. The Dantas gambit was never real. It was never a genuine strategic plan. It was a power play, a public relations maneuver designed to assert dominance over the narrative and to remind Caitlyn Clark that her role in this offense was subject to the whims of the coaching staff. And Friday night's box score proved it was hollow from the very beginning. To maintain absolute credibility and analytical integrity, we cannot present this performance as flawless. There are legitimate statistical concerns embedded in this box score that would be dishonest to ignore. Caitlyn Clark committed 6 turnovers on Friday night. That number marks the 5th consecutive game in which she has recorded 4 or more turnovers. Some of those giveaways were the natural byproduct of aggressive, high-risk playmaking. Some were the result of excellent defensive anticipation by the Valkyries, who are one of the best defensive units in the league. But the volume has become a pattern, and patterns demand correction. 6 turnovers against 9 assists is a ratio that, while still net positive in terms of overall offensive creation, indicates that Clark is occasionally forcing reads that are not available. Whether this is a function of teammates not being in expected positions, defensive schemes specifically designed to bait her into risky passes, or simply a young superstar pressing too hard to make something happen. It must be monitored. The margin between a brilliant no-look pass and a careless turnover is razor thin, and Clark has been living on the wrong side of that margin too frequently in the early portion of this season. Additionally, the team's overall free throw shooting was problematic. While Mitchell was perfect, the roster as a whole shot just under 76% from the charity stripe, missing 7 attempts. Lexi Hull went a deeply troubling 1 for 4 from the line. In a game decided by 8 points, those 7 missed free throws represent potential insurance points that could have turned a competitive contest into a comfortable blowout. Against elite opponents later in the season and certainly in the playoffs, leaving that many points on the board will eventually result in devastating losses. The Indiana Fever won this basketball game 90-82. They handed the Golden State Valkyries their first defeat of the season. Their record stands at 4-2, and it is worth noting that both of their losses came in overtime, meaning this team was literally one single possession away in 2 separate games from being completely undefeated at this point in the schedule. On the surface, this looks like a franchise trending in a powerfully positive direction. The box score is filled with encouraging numbers, dominant individual performances, and evidence of a roster that possesses genuine championship-level talent. But beneath the surface, this organization is fracturing. The Wednesday injury fabrication did not go away because of a Friday night victory. The coaching sabotage of new acquisitions did not become acceptable because the team happened to win despite it. The front office dysfunction, the social media trolling of fans by organizational figures, the contradictory press conference statements that collapse under the slightest scrutiny, none of that disappears because Caitlyn Clark dragged this team to a win through sheer individual brilliance and force of will. What Friday night actually proved is the most terrifying reality facing the Indiana Fever. This team wins when Caitlyn Clark plays, when she is healthy, when she is given the basketball, and when she is allowed to operate without interference. And this organization has repeatedly demonstrated that it is willing to remove her from games, diminish her role publicly, and prioritize coaching ego over competitive success. Caitlyn Clark is currently carrying a broken organization on her shoulders. She is playing 32 minutes a night in a system that actively works against her instincts. She's creating offense for teammates while her coach benches the athletic forward who could maximize her impact. She's winning games while her general manager engages in petty social media battles with the very fans who fund the franchise. The league office has seen the Wednesday timeline. They have seen Friday's box score. They know what the juxtaposition of those 2 events means. The question is whether they have the institutional courage to act on what the evidence so clearly demonstrates. This franchise is 4-2, but it is surviving entirely on the superhuman output of a 24-year-old point guard who is playing the best basketball of her young career while navigating the most dysfunctional organizational environment in professional women's basketball. The box score does not lie. The numbers do not lie. And the truth that emerged from Friday night's performance against Golden State is louder, clearer, and more damning than anything the Indiana Fever front office can manufacture to cover it up. This is simply explained. If you demand the unvarnished, analytically rigorous, fearlessly honest coverage of this unfolding saga that the mainstream sports media establishment refuses to provide, subscribe right now and activate notifications. Drop your reaction in the comments. Does Caitlyn Clark playing 32 dominant minutes on Friday night prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Wednesday's injury was fabricated? Should Stephanie White face consequences for deliberately burying Grace Van Slooten out of spite? I want every honest basketball opinion in that comment section. The receipts are documented. The timeline is sealed. And we are not going anywhere until every single person responsible for this dysfunction is held accountable. We will see you in the next one.